What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Bartender. It's summertime, and I can't believe it, but 2024 is more than half over. Kids today, that's the refrain, and it has been for time immemorial. More seasoned folks have always looked for a talisman or a soothsayer to help them figure out the next generation of folks. Well, today we've got Hannah MacDonald Dannecker on the program, and she's on a mission to bridge the gap between previous generations and Gen Z. She's a speaker, consultant, and she runs marketing for the Better Together group of companies. Oh, and she's the author of a book titled, Well, Shit, Time to Grow Up. This conversation was a blast, and I think you're going to dig it. So buckle up, TCBers, grab your favorite cocktail, and let's get right on into it with Hannah MacDonald Dannecker on today's TCB.
Welcome to SkyTeam's The Corporate Bartender, where we gather some of the best HR and people leaders to discuss what's happening on the people side of business. Now pull up a stool, belly up to the bar, and join us for The Corporate Bartender.
Welcome, everybody. It is Wednesday. You know what that means. It's your favorite day and mine. It's Corporate Bartender Day. It is the 26th of June, 2024, and the 199th time that we've convened this group of awesome people. As I am wont to do, I will marvel at the passage of time. 2024 is half over already. It's almost Christmas, right?
No, don't say that.
Seriously, stop. It's early summer.
We are creeping up on episode number 200. I never thought when we started this thing we would do it 100 times, much less 200 times, but yet here we are still doing it. Today is going to be a fun day. We've got a guest. Her name is Hannah MacDonald Dannecker. She is the host of another podcast with a great title called Workish. And she's the author of a book that I think is supremely titled. It's called Well, Shit, Time to Grow Up. Something I think we've all said to ourselves at one point or another. Before we get into that, just a little housekeeping. We've got some upcoming guests. We've got all kinds of really good book titles. On the 10th of July, we've got Stan Rose, PhD. He's the author of Can't Tame a Mongoose, Memoir of a Genomics Entrepreneur. I thought, well, that sounds super interesting. I want to get into that conversation. He works with early stage companies and has a lot of people things that he likes to talk about. So we're going to get into that on the 10th of July. And then on the 24th of July, One Drop of Poison, How One Bad Leader Can Slowly Kill Your Company, is Sean Lemson's book. He's going to be here talking about that, and our HR folks here in this community and on these calls, I think we can all identify with those toxic leaders that we've had in businesses that we've tolerated.
It sounds dramatic, but true.
It's right. Right. It is 100% true. Last item of housekeeping here. Normally it's the travel gods that speak. This time it's the holiday gods. TCB will be dark next week, July 3rd, 2024, in observance of the holiday, meaning I will probably be grilling things at this point in time, and will be probably too many grill beers deep to do this show. So with that, let's get into our conversation with Hannah. Hannah MacDonald Dannecker is on a mission to bridge the gap between previous working generations and this mysterious, mystical Gen Z. She's looking to create an open environment where we can work better together, which is also the name of the company that she works for. And I love that because it's the hashtag connected with our book, which is right here, You, Me, We, Why We All Need a Friend at Work and How to Show Up as One. The hashtag is Better Together. So that was the first thing that caught my eye. Hannah is going to help us decode this Gen Z mystery. She published a book called Well, Shit, Time to Grow Up. It's sort of a post-graduation memoir where she kind of takes us through her journey. and how she conquered imposter syndrome. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We talked about that with Scott Mounts last week. I've written a couple pieces on it. It's a thing that Lori and Ruby and I talk about all the time. So I'm curious to see, is there something magic or mystic that we don't know that younger people are experiencing with imposter syndrome? Is it different? Is it the same? So we'll get into all that. But, and we didn't warn her because we never do. Hannah, you're in for an experience here today. Let's give Hannah a good, solid TCB welcome, shall we? See, Hannah, we dance people onto the show. That's how we do it here.
Oh, I like it. I'll get right into that. That's fine by me.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be doing this. I just watched a couple of your episodes, and the more I learn, the more I understand that this is just going to be a really fun and great time together. So this will be good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's what we hope. So we always like to start with a little bit of an origin story. I imagine that when you were a wee child up in the northern Great White North in Canada, you didn't say, when I grow up, I'm going to help decode my generation to the people that have preceded me here. And I'm going to be an author and a speaker. And this is what I'm going to grow into. I imagine you had other ideas. So tell us a little bit about your journey, how it started, and how you ended up here doing this job today.
Yeah, so I did tell you that I would answer that question about what did I want to be when I grew up, which is not the same as how I ended up here, but we can go through both of them. Though what I wanted to be when I grew up was a race car driver. Okay. And the story that goes with that is I have a lead foot. I work in transportation. Oh, I love and have so much respect for the highway. But honestly, I just really struggle to have a feather. And so there was this one time I was driving down the highway. I was a freshman in university, taking 3 of my roommates from Virginia to Ontario for Thanksgiving because it was Canadian Thanksgiving and they had never experienced that. I was like, come on, let's go. It'll be super fun. And so we get in the car, we're driving. I'm like, how cool. I've never had a ticket. And of course, what do I see? The lights up in my rear view mirror going behind me. Of course, naturally, that's just what happens.
And this is an American ticket, yes?
This is an American ticket in Virginia. The police officer pulls me over. I was going 40 kilometers over the speed limit, which is like 30-ish miles over the speed limit.
In Virginia, that's reckless.
And in Virginia, that means you're sentenced to prison for reckless driving, which is exactly what they sentenced me to. This little 19-year-old girl. I was like, please, my friends, they're in the car. Like, I'm trying. We're in the middle of nowhere. They have no way to get home. But yeah, he threatened to arrest me on sight. And that was like the most insane thing. And when I really knew that my dream to be a race car driver was real and I needed to continue to pursue it. So that's how it started.
I love it. I grew up in Virginia. I know the wrath of those podunk Virginia police. And when they catch you plus 20, you're in for a conversation at the very least.
Yes. Unfortunately, I was ridiculous and I refused to believe that I was going that much faster. I was like, I could not be going that fast. I was like, I couldn't be going that fast. And also I'm reading kilometers per hour when it's miles per hour. I'm just a little girl. I don't know what I'm doing. I played that card so hard.
Not from around here.
I don't know what's going on, but you know what? It worked out. I did not go to jail, didn't get the ticket. It was just fine. But it did help me at that young age be like, right, okay, there are other people on this road that I do need to figure out. And that was, not the beginning of my my love for transportation, but ironically, most of my stories do end up back in a car, very similar to that. So,
well, if I'm not mistaken, your first job started on a snowboard, yeah?
That it did. Yes, I lived on a snow hill, at the top of a snow hill. And at the age of 14, I really wanted a job because I couldn't be sitting at home. I was not good at doing that. And so I found the only thing that I had transportation to, which was a snowboard. I lived in the middle of nowhere on a ski hill. And I was like, well, I can snowboard down this hill and work at this ski resort. So anytime that I could, I worked in their customer service department and helped fit people for snowboards and skis and boots. And it was a very good, very funny first job. But really, that was my first legal job. You and I were talking before about kind of like, what do you do in a family business? So you start working right away. I mean, I was stuffing what we call T4s, which is just part of your processing and paperwork in Canada, but in envelopes, sitting and listening to Saturday morning cartoons as probably like a 6-year-old. I mean, in family business, you start young, you just do stuff to do stuff because you got to help the family, right? So
absolutely. How did you stumble into this path of deciding to write a book and deciding to help, old folks like us Xers decode the Gen Z population?
Oh my goodness. So the book stemmed from a desire to travel a lot. Again, back to that car, I loved driving. I loved driving from Ontario to Florida, specifically in the time period when the border was shut and we had to quarantine in Canada. And I quarantined in Canada through the pandemic probably 7 or 8 times, which at the time looked like 14-day solo quarantine. So I had a lot of time on my hands.
Because in Florida, you could just do whatever you want.
Yeah. And I was dating somebody that lived here at the time. We're now married, but so we were traveling a lot back and forth, dealing with just quarantine laws. And so I was at home really frequently. And, as you do when you're in young love, starting to daydream about the future and my children and what that would look like. And I was experiencing so much life and struggling to accept my mother's words for what they were, because I was like, you're older than you've experienced, more, you can't relate. It doesn't fit. And I feared that one day that would happen to me with my kids. And so I started to write down all of these stories, all of these lessons, and kind of started to accumulate them in these periods of time when I was sitting home alone doing nothing. And so I used that time and I basically just filled up a diary, and then the diary was full. And I was like, I would love to give this to the people that I've written about as a gift. Like, hey, you've done this to me. Like, you've given this lesson to me. You've helped me learn this thing. Like, I should at least let you read what I've now written. And so I gave it back and I wrote it out and I gave it back to all of them for a Christmas gift one year. And then after that, it just snowballed really quickly and it turned into a passion project gone rogue. And came out like this. So
That's awesome.
That was the beginning of the book. But the gap generation thing. And I do tell people that well shit is very boomer endorsed is the word that I use. Like the lessons that are taught here are taught by a lot of different generations, right? And so it did help to bridge that gap before I even really knew that that's what I was trying to do. Because people ask me all the time when they hear my presentation, they're like, okay, that's great. This is what you're telling me. But now, like, what do I tell my kids? I'm like, get them this book. Like, this will help. But that really came together, to be honest with you, just naturally. Like, that was not intentional.
Interesting.
But while I was living in Florida, pre the pandemic, after going to Liberty, so you're getting a little bit of that timeline here. Sorry, we're hopping around. But after going to Liberty pre-pandemic, while I was living here, I was a substitute teacher and I was doing my university degree. And so I was all about the high school students. I would go in, I would take attendance, I would help them the way that they needed to be helped. And then I would sit down and do my own work. It was the best deal. But what happened from that was a passion and a love for these students that I was surrounded by every single day. I was like 20 years old at the time, and I didn't have any idea. I was like, why would I even consider talking to 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds? Like, sometimes I had kids who were just a year younger than me in the grade 12 class, and I had just graduated. I prematurely did everything. Like, I graduated high school early and then university. So I had just had those certifications. I was like, I'll just go back and do it. But I had never expected the connection. And after I got to know them, I had such a heart for this generation that I was a part of. And I was able to speak about this generation in a way that not most of us were able to. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of got really active in our own family business, saying, okay, like if we're going to make this work, if I'm going to be able to continue to stay in this family business, like let's figure out how to do this as a family in a way that we can all enjoy coming to work every single day. And we started to make a couple changes, and it started to work really well, and it was really exciting. And then started to post on LinkedIn about it. And I was like, hey, we did this and it was really cool. We did this and it was really cool. And as that was all coming together, somebody reached out to me. Someone else saw it in me. I did not see it in myself. And they were like, hey, we need someone to come talk about the next generation. Like, would you mind? I was like, I mean, maybe. I mean, I could, but like, what do you want me to talk about? And they were like, well, I don't know, you tell me, like, we don't really know. And so I took so much time, and I was so concerned that I was not going to be able to do it. Just like what you talked about, experiencing that imposter syndrome in that moment, just like, oh my gosh, it couldn't be me. But as I was doing it, I was talking to so many of my peers saying, what would you want to say? Like, how would we go through this? And I just accumulated all of this information over probably 3 years of the staffing industry experience. And I was like, okay, now I can't not do it. And so I came out on the other side and I was like, yeah, let me come forward. Let me do this presentation. And the whole thing came down to, how do we recruit them and how do we retain them and how do we work the best with them so that they can do what they need to do, yes, but that we can also help them be the best that they can be, and we can work together in a way that has some harmony. And it kind of all really came together nicely. And at the end of it, I was able to look back and go, wow, I can really tie a bow on that package together. I can't believe it all worked and tied so nicely. But I'd be lying if I said that those two things were super intentional, because they weren't. It really just happened very nicely for me.
Nice. I love it. Before we go deeper, let's just do some definitions, right? So for those who are listening that may not, because I always have a hard time remembering what's the year that the thing starts and the thing stops. And
yeah, I looked it up too.
So Hannah, let's define Gen Z. What is Gen Z?
So Generation Z is born between 2012 and, oh my gosh, 1997. So they are named a lot of different things. You might have heard them as the Zoomers, the Centennials, the Rainbow Generation, the Solo Generation. They go by a lot of different names, but Gen Z is the most specific term that people use.
All right. So that's, I mean, I was listening to one of your episodes, and you mentioned on there that you said, people say to you, that sounds like a long time. It's big, but it's actually the smallest generation
to date.
Yeah.
Yeah. People do think that it's really long because they see some other generations, and they seem very short. And then they look at Gen Z, and we are young, right? And so you see the youngest versions of us and you see the oldest versions of us, and you're like, wow, what a gap. And it's like, well, yeah, but in 20 years, it's not going to look like a gap at all. And so there is this kind of like misperception that we are a very, very big generation. But because of the way the technology has advanced, the generations are continuing to get smaller because things are changing faster. Yeah. And so it's making them different based on different things. And so there's actually another generation that comes after us already, which is Gen Alpha. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Because you say 97 to 2012. I mean, that's like people that are 26 and people that are 12. And it sounds big because it's now. But if you go back and look at millennials, slightly longer generation span, Xers bigger, boomers even bigger, right? I mean, if you think about the age that the earliest boomer turned 18 and the latest boomer turned 18, there's a lot of years passed between those two things.
Absolutely.
So I think it looks big because some of the folks in this complement right now are still, navigating 8th or 9th grade, right? So
yeah, they're still figuring a lot of stuff out. It's very, very different. Their problems, they're very diverse right now.
Yeah.
So you mentioned attracting and retaining Gen Z. Laura, you had some questions about this. I'm gonna hand it to you to talk about this talent acquisition conundrum here with Gen Z.
Yeah, it was interesting. So Cable Labs, where I work, is a small organization. We're less than 200 employees, but we've been doing some, kind of looking at year over year, what does our turnover look like? And a few years ago, our demographics for the generations were like a third, a third, and a third, baby boomer, Gen X, millennial. And it just in the last 3 years, it's shifted significantly where there's a serious core of Gen Z coming in. And so I was just thinking about, okay, that tells me a few things. First of all, are our leaders prepared to lead different needs across the generations? And that, the children are our future, right? How do we really diversify the skill set and the level of expertise and kind of create a talent pipeline by engaging Gen Z more? And so that, that's where I'm curious about what's the best way to find them and what do they need? And I speak of them as like there's some entity swarming out there. But and then just that, like the onboarding piece and those first impressions and what is it that they're gonna really feel comfortable latching onto.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many different ways I could go with that. But I would start by saying I am impressed that you guys are looking at your numbers, that you're noticing this, that you're intentionally taking action on it and trying to figure it out, because it's really easy to let this go to the wayside. I have heard so many people come up to me and be like, I'll figure it out later. Like, I can't, I'm just going to hire somebody else because I know that I can communicate well with somebody who's just like me or whatever that may be. And so it can be very easy to skip over Gen Zs because you just don't necessarily understand it. But I really just have so much respect for people who are not only taking note of it, but taking action on trying to figure it out. But the first thing that I always recommend to people is that they understand where they come from. Like, why are they the way that they are, right? Like, that's kind of the first thing. And it's funny, I just did this presentation, like I said, a couple of days ago, and I tried a new opening to it. And I said this. It was unfortunately not the kindest crowd. Sometimes you have really, really nice crowds who are great at keeping their phones away, very respectful. This crowd was not turning out to be one of those. So I get up on stage and I said, okay, I want everybody to take your phone out, right? Take it out, hold it up high. And I want you all to wave them around in your hands. And I want you to turn them off. And I want you to put them away.
What?
And it was a room full of transportation specialists. And transportation specialists love to have their phones on them because it is a hot and busy industry that is always churning. And I said, this is much more important for me to tell you, much less important for you to do. And then I kind of continued on and I said, I will tell you later why. We kept going. I had this little game I start with. And then we got to the point where I was going to tell them that this is what they need to learn about Gen Zs first before we can do everything. And I said, do you remember when I told you to put your phones away? And they were like, yeah, like the grumble that you hear in the crowd. And they said, or what I said was, I wanted to tell you that because what I wanted you to feel was the feeling of somebody who knows nothing about you, telling you to do something that you don't necessarily know how to do, that I know nothing about. And the whole room was like, huh. And I said, it's not super fun to take a big step back and to really try to learn. But if we try to influence other people with no information, how are we effectively going to do that? And so it's really important to first understand who they are, because it's so easy once you've adopted that generation to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is my action plan. And then just, and make an action plan. And that's great. Make an action plan, but make an action plan based on some information, right? So they were really influenced by technology. 97% of Generation Z says that they would make a decision based on the technology that's in the company, which is insane. And typically here, people think, actually, I'm just going to double check that stat. I've got it pulled up behind me. There's too many of them going through. I want to make sure. No, it's 91. Sorry, 91, which is not as intense as 97. 91 is still aggressive.
Still
it sounded
takes a
funny.
pretty big chunk out of 100.
It sounded funny when it came off my tongue. I was like, no, I want to get it very, very right for you. But most people think here that this is the technology that's in their CRM or their ATS or whatever they're looking at every day. And yes, that's important. Like people talk about the concept of gamification, which is basically what Duolingo did, which makes it really fun. And that's always great with Generation Z, right? That's how they grew up. That's going to be easy for them to adopt. But also, how is your Wi-Fi? Like, how is your computer? How is the
we've got
software?
expectations.
How is the software that's on your computer? Because if that is slower than their brain is working, that specifically is going to really, really challenge them. And so that little piece is the retaining. But it's funny because it comes all the way through. Yeah, sorry, Eric.
So you're saying, Hannah, that somebody getting issued a Dell computer from 2014 running Windows 8 is not going to light them up?
It's not going to be, I don't even know if it would light up actually. So I mean, I understand we need to be cost effective. I have an appreciation for that. I understand, but also let's make sure the tech's not making them mad. They're not trying to throw it against a wall. But
no, totally valid point. You said something else in one of your podcasts that I listened to prior to the show, another statistic about how many Gen Zs would accept an offer on the spot based on flexibility. Yeah.
78% would accept it on the spot, which is
what does that mean, flexibility? What does that mean to them?
I'm so glad that you asked. So because of the way that COVID is one of the other things that kind of changed and affected who they are, right? Because this was a massive part, and it depends on where they lived. You know, I was in Canada, so it was multiple years for me, but I was also experiencing it in Florida. So I have that other perspective where it was less intense. And so everybody was different, but it affected all of Gen Z. And it gave them this perspective that what they're doing can be flexible because they were able to do it from another spot. And so flexibility can be, yes, letting your employees work from home, right? Everybody's talking about working from home, but like that, let's just not stop there. I am our sales and marketing manager at the Better Together group. I love sales and I love marketing, and I can't choose one. And it's great for me that I have the opportunity to do both, and how phenomenal that I get to spend part of my time in here and part of my time in there. The sales part I'm really good at. The marketing part I really love. And so part of that feeds the company and part of that feeds me a bit. And both of them are good for both, you know, but it's interesting and important that you have both. Sorry, I have a very large storm that is closing in on me here. I think it will be fine. Our power should be good. But in case that's what's going on in the background, I apologize for any
I saw the flicker.
I didn't know if it was catching up on the mic. But yeah, so that could be the job that they're doing, right? That could be the place that they're working. That could be maybe the flexibility thing for them is that they have the chance to get extra hours. You know, most of these Gen Zs are working lower paying jobs right now, and they're really struggling, right? I just went to the grocery store today and I spent way too much money for 2 people to be eating. It was ridiculous. It's insane right now. Like just the cost of living is really challenging. So maybe they're looking for flexibility on getting more hours. Maybe they really struggle with a health condition of some sort, and they haven't figured out how to communicate that effectively yet. And they need some help with flexibility because it spikes at a specific time every day. And you can be the employer that's like, hey, you take care of yourself and then come back when you're ready, right? Like flexibility is 10,000 different things. And unfortunately, people are really zoning in on it as work from home when it could be a lot of things. So it's a flexible definition, you know?
Well, and it also seems like it's that we've talked about this on other episodes about at the talent acquisition phase, telling your story, your brand, what it's like to work there. if you're not super, super honest about that, if you're not really authentic about, no, this really is what it's like, super off-putting to people who then onboard and look around and go like, okay, you were making stuff up because I'm seeing it. And I feel like, and maybe this is the generational question, I feel like a Gen Z generation would have far less tolerance or patience for that and would be quicker to say, I'm out.
Absolutely. And I think that is a consequence of social media, which is a consequence of technology. So again, it comes back to based on who they are, right? But because I mean, every social media is so different, but specifically TikTok and Snapchat, which are the two that Generation Z is enjoying and using the most frequently. And the newer apps like Be Real and some other stuff, they're really trying to encourage the concept of being your most authentic self. Now, are they all succeeding in that? I mean, I don't want to be the one to say yes or no, but it is trying to encourage that. And so most often what happens is people who are in like a more high level role, let's call it a C-suite position, their definition of marketing material is going to be very tailored and specific. But Generation Z has grown up in a time where they've seen very authentic, unbox this with me, try this with me, use this with me. And so they're seeing a lot more of the real and a lot less of the, here is the beautiful picture of this, here is the beautiful image or video. Yeah.
And a lot of do-it-yourself kind of lower tech even.
Yeah.
Right? It's just me doing a video of me talking as opposed to a polished production of,
with a ring light or something. But absolutely.
I love that you said with me, right? That's something I haven't really thought about, right? They're including you in the journey, right? Which is not a thing that the polished chief marketing officer wants to put out there because it's too risky. I can't control all the variables in that equation. Ruby had dropped into chat as it relates to flexibility. What about formality? And one of the bullet points in your one sheet caught my attention, and it was they wore what to their interview? So let's talk about formality in terms of flexibility, and then let's decode this whole dress code thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So formality comes back to, ironically, both COVID and technology. So they have been growing up on platforms their entire life. And so they haven't had this concept of formal on the internet. And so it makes them feel like it's a very safe, very comfortable place. In fact, I think it's 65% of Gen Zs say that when they work from home, it makes them feel like they're more connected to their coworkers, which is really interesting. And so it's a place where they feel very comfortable because they've grown up there. And then through the pandemic, they had this period of time where things were so casual that we've transitioned into accepting less sometimes. And there is now a block of communication where people don't necessarily know what to do because they haven't experienced it before. And other people don't necessarily know how to ask them because it seems so simple to them.
Right.
And so there's this like, well, what do you mean you don't know that you can't wear slippers into the office?
Those are pajama pants.
Exactly. But really, it's, first of all, like, don't ever publicly say anything. I would never come at, I've seen that so many times, just a boomer being like, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, okay, that's a way to do it. A Generation Z specifically is probably going to feel pretty attacked about that in that moment. So I would, if you have a problem with someone in your company that is struggling to follow dress code, pull them aside properly, privately, say, hey, I just want to have a conversation with you about this. Perhaps you just don't know. Perhaps you haven't seen this. Perhaps no one has said this to you. And I don't want to tell you exactly what to wear and what to put on your body. That's not mine to say, of course. But can I help you perhaps understand what's going to set you up for success?
Yeah.
What's going to help put you in a better place than you're sitting right now? Because you're being perceived this way.
You're
and
establishing a brand that,
and I want to support you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a hard line, and I get that it's awkward because like specifically when it comes to dress code, and I mean, Gen Z is like, I've seen people show up to interviews in pajamas. I'm like, what are you doing? But we really just need to talk to them.
To your point though, Hannah, I mean, I'm the father to 2 Gen Z ladies, and one of them, you know, she entered her college experience. She had 1 year and then COVID hit. And for my younger one, like the last 2.5 years of high school were COVID oriented. Seeing those people whose high school and or college experience were influenced by quarantine and lockdown coming into the workforce now, like the baseline of what normal is doesn't exist for them, you know, and we talk about this a lot. Older folks, we have the baseline of what it was like before COVID, right? We know that we used to go to work every day and we used to walk to meetings together. And we went to lunch and we went to happy hours and we had all of these sort of, you know, magical, spontaneous conversations that allowed us to get to know each other on a different level. When we are working remotely and going from Zoom meeting to Teams call to Google Meet or whatever, they tend to be very task focused and they start and stop on the hour. I mean, you think about a meeting in real space. I mean, I worked for many, many years in offices where you would go to a meeting room and the meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock, but it didn't really start until 9:05 or 9:10 because you were just bullshitting in the room together. Well, that doesn't happen on Zoom. Like if you're a minute late, people are getting a little skitchy. Right. It's like, okay, we got shit to do, people. Like, let's get going. We're going to 10-minute professor rule you. And if you don't show up, I'm out. I'm going to go do my next thing. Right. So we Xers, millennials, we have this sort of baseline memory, this emotional memory of what it was like before that. And we keep waiting, you know, in big air quotes here, for it to go back to normal. Well, there is no normal now, right? Because you've got an influx of people coming into the workforce who have no idea what that looked or felt like. So I love what you said. Maybe they just don't know. And I go to the other end of the spectrum. Does it need to be that way? I mean, it was that way because that's the way it was. We didn't design it that way. It was just what we walked into. And what we're walking into now is different. So how does that land on you, Hannah, as a Gen Z?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you say that because that casual conversation that flows in the middle of those meetings, when I'm in an office, to be very frank with you, it makes me so uncomfortable because I've never had to I never had the opportunity to be in that environment pre-pandemic. I graduated in the middle of the pandemic. And so I never walked across the stage. I never did the thing. I was very online. And I mean, it is what it is. It doesn't matter at this point. But the part that does matter is that I just don't know how because I did not learn. And so now I am very intentionally trying to have those conversations with people and not rush them. And just if you're talking about like a disc profile, I'm like a high D. I'm like, let's get this done. Like, let's just
move on.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And I really have to, like, at different times, I've put different sticky notes up in front of me, put different things in my line of vision, just to be like, just slow down, just ask them how they're doing. Like, just calm down. Because for me, that was deemed as unproductive in the period of time when I learned to work. And now I have to rewire the way that my brain works. And it's like, no, that's actually just building relationships with your coworkers or your clients or whatever. And so it's a really funny transition. And it's, again, about helping your Gen Zs see whatever that culture is within your culture, because everybody's different. Every company is different. And I think that really starts with seeing it at the top level of leadership, right? Just I think I listened to one of your podcasts the other day, and your guest had mentioned that the president put a picture of their bike in, and it got everybody to start talking about it, and it just brought everybody to this base level. And it's like, just send a photo, right? Like in our team groups, the other day we talked about everybody's wedding songs. The week before that, we shared baby photos. The week before that, we talked about our favorite movie. Like, and it's intentional. Like we bring it forward, but we do it so that we have the opportunity to not just have relationship, or not just communication, but actually relationships.
Well, I want to poke at that a little bit, because something you said is sort of an illumination point for me. You said that it stresses you out, right? It makes you anxious, these little small talk conversations. And what's really interesting about that is, like, for me, that was the thing that made me relax, right? Because in my experience, like, it was the business part of the meeting that was stressful. Like, if we got to bullshit about, what your favorite sports squad did over the weekend, or, what concert you went to, that was like, ooh, breath of fresh air. I can relax a little bit. We learned about a thing recently, and I say we as collective for old people, about this concept. Hey, look, I'm 53. I've earned it.
Own it.
Right? All 53 of these years. I learned about this concept of hay hanging, and how hanging, when someone in an instant message platform, Slack, whatever, says, hey, for some people, this is the most stressful part of their day. And that kind of blew my mind, because from the old person's perspective, I'm like, I'm going to say something innocuous. Hey, hi, sup, whatever. And if you don't respond, I'm going to assume that you're busy, and I'm going to move on with my life, right? I'll send you an email later, right? Because you weren't available in real time. And in the old days, I would have just popped by your desk and said, hey, Hannah, do you have a sec? Right. And that inherently, while it might have been mildly annoying because it busted your flow, it typically wasn't anxiety inducing. And to learn that, the approach that I was taking, trying to be, inclusive and broad in my step there, was potentially stressing the fuck out of people, was a little disheartening to learn.
I imagine it would be. And it's so hard, right? Because we don't want to get so afraid of the people around us that we stop being who we are, right? And so like, it is really hard, because you look at the other generation, like, I don't even, and maybe you just don't even touch it, right? Which takes you back to the first spot of just not, which isn't great either. And so that's why that's why I made stuff like, well, shit, it has the opportunity to help bridge that in between, because both people have to come a little ways. Like, you have to be able to say hi to somebody. That's not an unrealistic expectation. But we do have to kind of have that funny understanding in the middle.
Yeah. So it's striking me about, because we do, Ruby and Eric and I, in our different ways and audiences, do use the DISC profile quite a bit.
Okay.
From that start with self-awareness, learn what your preferences and tendencies are, therefore having a better understanding that not everyone's just like you, and what are the value in those differences, and how can I adjust my expectations and my style to work the room I'm in, right? So that's age independent. That's just who you are as a human inside.
Yeah.
But then there's all the layers, right? We're more complex than just our DISC style. And so then it makes me think, like, Eric, you're bringing up this example of the hanging hay. Is that a generational thing, or is that a DISC style thing? Right? Is that how do you modify, like, what's a Gen Z thing I need to be aware of versus, to your point, Hannah, you're a strong D DISC style. So the small talk thing is not your jam at any age.
It's just annoying.
Right? Yeah. But what if someone in a Gen Z is a
S.
really strong S?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then that part of it looks different for them, but it's not it may or may not be a generational thing. So that's where I'm struggling. Like there's just good who you are as a human and how do you adjust, or recognize we need to adjust for people around us because we're not all the same. And what are the actual generation things? And I love all of the context around the really formative transition through COVID is a huge piece of what has to be for sure a generational thing for that age group. It was a generational thing for Gen X too. I mean, for Gen X too, or right, boomers who were like, Zoom, how do I, right? So I mean, everybody had their struggles through that probably was tailored to an age range, but it's just people are just so complex, right? How do we parse out what's a generational thing versus what's a innate personality?
Just a human thing. Yeah, well, I think it's both and, right? Like I don't think that one is necessarily more significant than the other. I think that they definitely will play a role and walk hand in hand together. I think that because the pandemic happened at the time that it did, as Generation Z was what I like to consider the term of baby adults. They were growing into their adulthood, so they were not babies anymore, right? Yeah. But they were starting to make adult decisions in a time where the globe was very weird across the board. And so that's going to shape who they were as a human. I was just on the phone this afternoon with one of my good friends, and she and I were talking about the concept of going to Costco. And I was like, I'm going to go to Costco. And she's like, a Costco.
On purpose?
And I was
on
like,
a Saturday?
And so the last time I went, it was a Saturday, and we walked through the conversation that was bad, but today perhaps at 2:00 it would be better on a Wednesday. And she was like, no, this will be good. This will be good. We were talking about our anxiety though, about getting in a room with a lot of people. Yeah. And I used to love it. I used to thrive in it. I used to be like, let's go dance. Let's go to this. Let's go to that. Let's go to a museum. Let's go to an amusement park. It didn't matter the setting, but if there was a lot of people, I was so for it. And the last time I was in one of those settings recently, since the pandemic, I had a massive anxiety attack and I left heaving because I literally just could not stand that close to that many people. And it was so weird to me to step back and be like, oh, I used to love this. This used to feed my energy. And that pandemic really did transfer me from being a very outgoing person to a really introverted person. And I have moments where I am good to go and be extroverted, but really it transitioned that in me. And so it plays, yes, it is it the pandemic? Is it who you are? But it is also that the pandemic changed who a lot of they were because it happened when they were really in a transformative age, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and I think the fact that there was so much like literally life and death connected to COVID. It was no joke, right? It was, you follow these rules because you can die from this, right? Or you follow these rules because your grandma can die from this. And so I think that put so much like, whoa, that's, it's different than my parents chose to homeschool me. And so I had a different social, upbringing than traditional school. There was so much at stake for so long that and brain development and habit forming, all of those things are in those formative years up until your early 20s. And so that wiring is getting set during a highly traumatic, anxious time. Yeah.
And it's hard because it did, just like what you said, Ruby, it did revolve both around what their character was, but also then what their work habits were, because it was happening in a time where they were just starting their career. So that anxiety for me doesn't actually come from the concept of talking to another human. I'm like, I'm so happy to sit here and have a conversation with you. But why I struggle with that is because my brain was formed to think that every moment of the working day was meant to be productive. And so I run at a pace and it's just chug, 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 so fast and so forward.
It's not D at all.
My computer works really well. My software works really well. I've got all of the tech to set me up. So everything that I'm doing functions fast. And I was working at a time where we were just starting to really look at KPIs. We were like, okay, what are these people doing and what are they doing from home and how do we figure it out? And my computer was being watched and screen time. And like, there are all these different ways that things were being implemented that it made me as an employee in my first few years of work feel like every second of the day mattered because I was working to keep that job in that time. And I mean, I say this, I came to a family business. I had a really great job. I'd say it like I was fighting for it. I wasn't. I want to be very clear. I had a very stable thing, but that's the average experience of the average Gen Z. Yeah. And that's what I was feeling in that moment. Just like what you and Eric, like what we were talking about, Eric, I need to prove that I'm good to be here because no one really thinks that it's true in a family business. That's a whole different thing.
This is why devices like mouse jigglers were invented.
That's right. Innovation, man.
yeah, that's just insanity to me. Oh goodness gracious. But it is hard because we're fighting that wiring from when we first stepped in.
So as we come to the close of our time together, Hannah, if you could give sort of the one pearl of wisdom for all the non-Gen Zers out there that we should take into consideration, whether that's a hiring decision, a performance review decision, just a one-on-one conversation decision, someone who's not Gen Z, what should we put in the back of our mind before we go into those conversations? If you could boil that down to one pearl of wisdom, what would you advise?
I would say listen to learn to understand, and then understand before you speak. It's so simple when you're talking to somebody who you're managing or you're working with on a regular basis to just flow right into this is exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. But if we don't first take a moment to step back and really understand what it is that they're saying before we try and influence them, it's going to be challenging for that information to be effective. So listen to learn to understand, and then understand before you speak.
Love it. All right. Hannah, if people want to learn more about you, they want to buy the book, where out there on the worldwide interwebs do we find you?
Yes, please check it out. I've got 3 additional books. There is this website called x2z.org, x2z.org, and it's got links to everything that I do.
Awesome. Fantastic. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. We are going to get into our end of show ritual because I know we're running out of time. And I know people are getting hungry. And for Hannah, it's getting on 7:00. So
it's all good. I had a good McDonald's meal before we hopped in. Excited for it.
Wow, we need to have a conversation about that, Hannah. So make better choices. All right. I'll take my dad hat off. Funny things. Funny thing number 1 that made me laugh. For us HR people, we know what it's like when our employees get an EOB and they don't know what to do with it. EOB, explanation of benefits. This is not a bill. This is a $52 charge for toothbrushing instruction that showed up on an actual explanation of benefits, toothbrushing instruction, and that dentist practice felt pretty good about $52 being a reasonable and customary charge.
Dang.
For instructing some shitty tooth person how to brush their teeth.
I love the caption. Sorry, what?
I didn't see that. That's good.
Oh, for the Gen Xers on the line here, I don't know how to explain this, but Dave Matthews has been 45 for 30 years.
Right?
I know. Oh, good.
Oh, Hannah will appreciate this because she lives in the South. Customer, I have a question about my account. Bank teller, withdrawal. Customer, oh, sorry. I have a question about my account.
That's great.
This one made me giggle. When you look at the picture and you read the caption, I want you to sing the caption in your head, and then you'll get it.
Oh, geez.
Oh my God.
Dang.
Right?
Wow.
Very MJ.
Looks a lot like Michael Jackson. Hannah will appreciate this one, as will we all, because this is what it's like working in an office in 2024. Working in an office is like, okay, we're transitioning to Salaria, but payroll is still in Bullfrog. Did you see my Newscock post? Submit your time card on Fireplace and then jizz me on SmackDog. Don't upload to Crackers without Yammer approval.
Oh my God.
Yes. Too many.
Yes.
Oh, it's too much for sure. That's
Jizz me on
great.
SmackDog.
Just be honest.
I like the Yammer approval.
Don't. Yeah. Don't do that.
But my favorite funny
Oh,
thing
God,
today
that's
was
funny.
posted by the National Park Service, and whoever's doing their social media, they got game here. Ready? Believe in yourself, like visitors who believe they can pet a bison.
Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God.
Today's Good Feels story is another Steve Hartman, but it's not going to make you cry. It's just pretty poignant, and it's about Maine, and that's where Lori and I go every summer. So here we go. I wonder how the technology is there, Hannah. I wonder if they've got good Wi-Fi
The
speeds.
internets.
That is wild and so funny. Oh my goodness, that's great.
Today's semi-quarantine cocktail is called the Ugly Dog. It's a riff on the Coyote Ugly cocktail. You're going to need a little bit of tequila. You didn't know California has an ugliest dog contest.
Oh no.
3/4 of an ounce of pineapple juice. This guy here was the runner-up in the Ugly Dog contest for 3 years in a row. A little bit of lime juice. This is Wild Thing, and he's from Bend, Oregon. You're going to need a little Liqueur 43. He's a distemper survivor. His teeth didn't grow in, so his tongue always hangs out, and his right front leg paddles all the time, 24/7. A little cinnamon syrup, and you can follow Wild Thing Official on Instagram.
Nice.
Some smoked chili bitters, and look at that fur. I mean, look at that little dude.
Oh my word.
That's an ugly, ugly dog.
Oh, jeez.
Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks to Hannah MacDonald Dannecker. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. It was a great conversation. We will see you in 2 weeks. Next week's a holiday. We'll be back with more fun stuff. Go have good dinners, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you had a good time and learned a thing or two at today's happy hour, please share it with your friends. If you want to join our tribe, head on over to skyteam.cloud/TCB or email us at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again, and remember, you've always got friends at the Corporate Bartender.